Ethology. Ethology, the main points of it being that it was in contrast to sort of our evolution of behavior models, where instead of sort of theoretical, you would want to do this under this circumstance if you were a crab, instead it's actually observing animals. And observing animals in their natural habitat, studying a dolphin swimming in a bathtub, you can't do that. And as a counter to sort of classic behaviorism, third principle, forget this universality stuff. What you were looking at is how every species has uniquely solved a unique set of pressures on it, and you really can't appreciate it without stomping around in the field and getting mud on your socks. Okay, what we saw was sort of the organizing principles of it. What's the behavior, fixed action patterns? What is it good for? Not adaptive in the theoretical evolution of sense, but go out and do an actual experiment. What is the releasing stimulus? What's the environmental stimulus that triggers the behavior? What is the innate releasing mechanism? What's going on in the brain by which a releasing stimulus causes a fixed action pattern to pop out the other side? We then looked at, so where does learning fit into this? And we saw in some cases, learning was completely like the usual stuff, reinforcement, but simply occurring in surprising places. For example, counter to like all sorts of stereotypes, female primates do not instinctually know how to be competent mothers. Baby meerkats do not instinctually know how to take on a scorpion, learning in a conventional sense. And then near the end, what we transitioned to were the types of learning that were specific to ethology, that violated all sorts of those basic behaviors principles, saying one trial learning, imprinting, things of that sort. And note, we now have had the word imprinting in two different contexts. And what we were getting to at the end was the notion of prepared learning. We are not innately afraid of spiders and snakes, but we are prepared to be afraid of them more readily than we are of random kitchen items. We have prepared learning to associate stomach problems with a smell rather than a sound. We have prepared learning to associate the face of a them, an outgroup member, with something scary during fear conditioning. We associate them with that more readily than we associate an in-group member. Pushing on with domains where we have prepared learning. We have prepared learning for faces, for not only recognizing faces and freaking out when they're abnormal and broken up all over the place, but for being able to learn stuff more readily in the context of animate objects. For example, you take kids and you've got infants and there's some sort of film where like the triangle is being mean to the square or the square is pushing the triangle and the kid has to have some sort of guess as to what happens next. How do you tell that a 10-month-old is guessing what happens next? Because if what something happens that they weren't expecting, their heart rate increases a little bit, their breathing rate, whoa, they are surprised. And you see not much of a response, but as soon as you animate them, as soon as you put faces on these, kids are far more responsive, kids are far more interested, kids are far more adept at figuring out what's going on. And in a while, we're going to see in a bunch of other species all sorts of circumstances of physical transitivity they fail at, but social transitivity, they're good at prepared learning for making sense of social things in the world around you more so than inanimate material things. One type of learning has only come through in the last few decades where if you talked about stuff like this back when, you were obviously so much of a like Pixar movie animal behaviorist in terms of inability to actually be objective and not anthropomorphize and all of that. And people have slowly learned that the following dirty word is totally relevant to other species, which is the word culture. And culture ways of doing things. That's the sort of stuff we do, we, my people, my group, ways of doing things that are not merely an outcome of ecological pressure. Oh, wow, it's like amazing when like it gets snowy and cold out. In this culture, people put on warmer clothes. No, that doesn't count, nor does it count when it's something that is clearly genetically based, sort of in our imprinting kind of realm and all of that. Culture passing on of styles of behavior through learning, active teaching, observation, trial and error, all of that. Ethologists started showing we're not the only folks with culture, and generations of cultural anthropologists had apoplexy at that point and fought it tooth and nail, but it is undeniable. The classic example was provided by Jane Goodall, one of the Olympian figures in ethology, primatology, an astounding person. Jane Goodall, who did the first long term studies of observing wild chimps in a reserve called Gombe in Tanzania, and saw all sorts of stuff people would never have imagined another species would do, including something that she saw one day which changed the definition of humans, which is she saw another species making tools. We are the tool making species. We're the only one who does that. And by now, tool making has been seen in dozens of other species, including all the interesting primates tool making. She saw a chimp sit down next to a termite mound, which is this big hardened mud thing that can be 10, 20 feet high. They're amazing. And zillions of termites are in there doing their own society stuff. And chimps love to eat termites. And what she observed was a chimp modifying a physical object in the chimp's universe, taking a stick and tearing off the side branches so it was nice and thin, and then pushing that into the termite mound and rotating it. And what are you doing if you're inside and you're a termite and suddenly this stick thing attacks your colony? You bite it. So all of them are bite, and the chimp will pull it out, and there's all these termites holding onto the stick. At which point, yum, the chimp eats the termites, and oh my God, this is tool use. And since then, there's been like 25 different types of tool use that chimps have been observed to do in different parts of Africa. In this region, they have this technique for getting termites out. In this other region, totally amazing. To- we're not the only species who makes tools. And where the culture thing came in that knocked the cultural anthropologist on their asses is seeing it is transmitted multi-generationally. You see young chimps sitting there watching mom making her various tools. And by now, tools like you sponge up a whole bunch of leaves to reach down into a hard to reach sort of hole of water to sop it up, and then you drink it and do it again and again. Things like that, observing that young chimps sit and learn from mom how to make a termite stick, things of that sort. Great study, and Pusey, University of Minnesota, observing that young male chimps do not learn how to make termite sticks anywhere near as fast as young female chimps do. In both cases, watching mom. How come? Because the young male chimps aren't paying attention and they're screwing around and they're wrestling and getting distracted and all of that. But whoa, multi generational transmission of tool making. This is culture. And people have slowly sort of come to terms with the ethological evidence that we're not the only species who has culture, transmission of sort of behavioral styles, treatment of material stuff, things of that sort. Another example is sort of the building block of culture. And this isn't chimps again, but it has since been observed in other primates. Totally cool. And you will all identify with this if you ever went through middle school. So you have a group of chimps, and you've got the alpha female. They're captive. They're in an outdoor enclosure, and you bring the alpha female into this sort of testing room where there's this puzzle box, this big like plastic complicated thing where you put a piece of food in there and you got to pull this out and then rotate this and eventually you could get to the bottom. And there's all these different ways of doing it. So alpha female spends a bunch of time sort of figuring out and comes up with a solution. Importantly, not necessarily the most efficient way, not necessarily the one with the fewest steps, sometimes with extraneous steps that accomplish nothing, but nonetheless, she comes up with this. And the first amazing thing is she now ritualizes this. She formalizes this. This is what she does every time to get a piece of that food. So now they take the puzzle box and they put it out in the middle for all the chimps to see. And along comes the alpha female and she does her thing there and she gets the food. And everyone says, wow, that's totally amazing. And before you know it, everybody is doing that. Everybody learns to open up the puzzle box the way she does. Wow, transmission of an acquired trait, transmission. So that's amazing in and of itself. And pretty soon you could see kids imitating their mothers doing it, multi-generational culture out the wazoo. And then the totally interesting finding, which is every now and then another chimp would stumble into one of the other ways you could open up the box, and perhaps even a more efficient way. But the most important thing being that's a different way of doing it. Whoa, they just invented something. They just discovered another way of going about their culture of getting to food inside these boxes. Wow, that's incredible. But the most incredible thing at that point is that this female who has discovered this other way of doing it goes back to doing it like everybody else, the building blocks of conformity. So, cultural transmission with hierarchy built into it and conformity. Please, please don't let me be any different from all the other kids in my eighth grade class and sort of that conformity building blocks of that. Another example of culture, and this is from some of the research that my wife and I did back when with baboons, showing a totally unique, bizarre circumstance in a troop of baboons that produced a very, very different cultural atmosphere. Okay, for complicated reasons having to do with an outbreak of tuberculosis, about half the males in the troop died. And the critical thing is the males who died were the aggressive ones, the ones who were least socially affiliated. And there was a reason why that was the case. In the aftermath, you were left with twice as many adult females as males, which is very rare. But even more atypical is the guys who were left were nice guys. They didn't displace aggression. They did a lot of grooming. They were all of that. And you saw the troop settled into having much lower levels of aggression than normal troop, more affiliative behavior, all of that. That's great. So, baboons, as you know from a few lectures back, baboons, in contrast to chimps, among baboons, it's males who at puberty pick up and leave their home troop and go and transfer to a different one. And thus, once every 6 months or so, a new adolescent male would show up from who knows where, the next county over, whatever he comes, an adolescent male who grew up in the crappy Hobbesian backstabbing world of normal baboon behavior, shows up into this troop where there's not that much aggression. And you don't displace aggression and things, and you come back a year later, and this kid who's now been in this group for a year has adopted this behavioral style. Multi-generational transmission of a social culture. And a lot of work went in on our parts to figuring out how it gets transmitted like that. So culture happening in all sorts of unlikely places, and learning to do something from your mother, from the influential alpha female, from things of that sort. Very, very unlikely until ethologists came along and showed that. Okay, so this leads us to our final area of ethology. And much of this had to do with this sort of pioneering work of this guy named Donald Griffin. Donald Griffin, totally amazing ethologist. Donald Griffin, he died, I don't know, about 20 years ago in his 90s. Donald Griffin, those of you who are sitting and sweating away in your senior theses, listen to this. In the 1930s, Donald Griffin's senior thesis in college at Harvard involved him discovering echolocation in bats. Whoa, and you're trying to get like your assay to work or whatever. He discovered echolocation as like a college senior doing his research and spent the rest of his career on that and was amazing and like the most amazing ethologist of all time. And everybody worshipped him, and that echolocation and spawned sort of generations of descendants doing neuroethology on echolocation. And sort of he's finally this old guy, and he is as like august and revered, as much of a dead white male as you could get. And in his old age, he did something totally crazy and radical, which is he published a book. He published a short book in which he put out some of the ideas that he's been having for a long time. And essentially, what he said in the book on the question of animal consciousness is we're not the only ones who think, who have an internal mental life. And the next big challenge for ethology is to try to understand what other species are thinking. Oh my God, people went crazy over this. Look at Griffin. Oh, heartbreaking seeing this giant descend into this sort of Disney movie anthropomorphism. I wonder if he's dementing. Oh my God, now he should go out and like figure out what the little animals are thinking. And all sorts of circles, really snarky, sort of snotty young ethologists writing book reviews about it, basically saying, oh my God, we thought he was a scientist and now this. And he stuck by it. And he started sort of a whole cadre of people who thought this was irresistible to go research this stuff. And thus was born this field of cognitive ethology. Try to figure out what the world is like inside the mind of some other species. And we've already seen something about that. We saw those chimp playback studies where you record the voices of all the chimps and each one under different circumstances and stick the speaker in the bushes there and play the sound of number one dominating number five. Okay, whatever. Play the sound of number five dominating number one, and they're from different families. Whoa, everybody stops and looks, and you can tell what they're thinking. They're thinking, whoa, that's not how things work around here. Number five just dominated number one. Experiments like that. And interestingly, that pair of researchers who I've mentioned a number of times, Cheney and Seyfarth from University of Pennsylvania, who sort of did those first playback experiments, they were trained by Griffin, sort of first generation of cognitive ethologists. So, what are some of the domains that has been explored by cognitive ethology? Self-awareness. Does an animal know there is a me? There is a me, and that's me. And this evolved with the famed dot on the forehead mirror test. When you go in, as you very lightly anesthetize your subject, and while they're asleep for 20 seconds, you put a red dot on their forehead. And you let them wake up, and they're wandering around their space, and you've put up a mirror, a mirror. They walk up to the mirror, and if they were a dog, we know exactly what the dog is going to do, which is to start barking at it and acting as if this is some invasive dog. And we know what stickleback fish are going to do. And what were chips observed to do instead? They look in the mirror and they touch this spot. They scratch at it. They're trying to figure out. They know that's me. And implicit in that, they know that there is a me, the dot self-awareness test. And that has now been shown in all sorts of species. Somebody, what's his name, Plotnik, did these studies in Thailand years ago showing that elephants have self-awareness according to his rules. But then you would start to find some species where you didn't see this. The cephalogist at Harvard, Mark Hauser, first reported marmoset monkeys, South American pair-bonding monkeys. Marmoset monkeys can't pass the dot on the forehead looking in the mirror self-awareness test. Oh, weird. Well, I guess they never quite evolved to that point. That's kind of surprising until he applied some ethological principles, which is marmosets don't make direct eye contact with each other. So a marmoset sees its reflection and it's not looking straight at the eyes there and suddenly notice something's going on here. So what he did was he put the dot on their chest. And promptly they showed, looking in a mirror, they'd be going, it's that, ooh, you've got to interview an animal. You have self awareness in the animal's language. Another version of that, dogs do not have self awareness by those rules, but it's been suggested that this is a measure of our paucity, our poverty of imagination when it comes to sensory systems. If you want to be doing does a dog understand that's me? There is a me. Don't do it with visual cues, do it with olfactory ones. And I know of a few people who are now trying to show dog self-awareness through the sensory modality that they actually care about, interview an animal in its language. So self-awareness. What cognitive ethology then tackled a next question, theory of mind. Incredibly trendy concept in developmental psychologists. At what age does an infant, a kid, first realize somebody has information that I don't have, or I have information that they don't have? Somebody thinks differently from what I know. First evidence of theory of mind, understanding that the cognitive world for somebody else does not necessarily align with your own, and that is viewed as what we'll eventually get to as a stepping stone for, ooh, not only do other people have different information, but other people have different emotions, a building block for empathy and compassion, all of that. Theory of mind, totally trendy, all sorts of really interesting debates in the field. Under what circumstances you see it, and developmentally, what does it mean if a kid is delayed in getting theory of mind, all of that. So then the question among the cognitive ethologists was, are we the only species that has theory of mind? And this was work by one of the giants of primatology, Franz de Waal. Franz de Waal, where I would normally say he is our greatest living primatologist, but really, unfortunately, he died last month at way too young of an age. Incredible work that he did at showing that we're not just the only species that does this, that, and the other, him showing this with theory of mind. Here's the sort of experiment he would do. So you got two chimps. You've got the alpha and the beta, hierarchy in this one, and they're sitting there to each sort of enclosure, sort of a door that they can look out through. And there is a barrier between the two sides. And in this version of the experiment, the barrier is translucent, is transparent. You can see through it. Each can see the other and what's going on. And now the human researcher comes in and there's a box over on this side and conspicuously walks in and puts a banana in the box. This is a banana getting to use the maggots here again. Who today's requirement fulfilled. Okay, so the human comes in and puts the banana in here. And this chimp sees it, this chimp sees it, all of that, and then they open the doors. So you're the beta male, and of course, you see there's a banana in there. This is the greatest thing on earth. And what they would then see is he thinks very sensibly, I'm not going anywhere near that box because he saw it also. He's coming in and he will trounce me if I go anywhere near it. He doesn't bother going to the box with the banana. He understands that this individual has the same information than he does, that he does. Now, next version of it, you put up a barrier that's opaque that can't be seen through, and the human comes in, puts the banana in here, and opens the doors, and this chimp immediately goes for the banana because he understands this chimp doesn't know there's a banana there. This chimp doesn't have the knowledge that I do. This chimp has a different theory of mind going on inside there, and that's totally amazing. Then the great elaboration, what you do is back to the see-through barrier, and the human comes in and puts the banana in here, and you take out this male now and bring in Another scary male, one who this guy is subordinate to. You open the doors and he goes right for the banana. He knows this guy wasn't here when the banana was put in there. This guy doesn't know there's a banana in the box. Theory of mind in that sense. And what you see then is all sorts of elaborations on this. Initially, the view in the field was you would only see theory of mind in other species if they were highly, highly motivated, like getting a banana or something. In the context of competition, it has since been shown to recur outside sort of the context of competition and just sort of all sorts of social settings. Other than being able to do theory of mind, there's one thing they have not shown themselves being capable of doing, which is what's called secondary theory of mind. Primary theory of mind. You understand that that individual has different information than you have. Secondary, you understand that that individual has information that that one doesn't, and making sense of their behaviors accordingly. That no other species has been shown to be up to, and that explains why, like, chimps would get incredibly bored sitting through a performance of a Midsummer Night's Dream of like, okay, who thinks the other one is in love with who, and secondary and tertiary theory of mind and all of that. We remain the only ones with it. So, what you see then is all sorts of fancy cognitive stuff like that, exactly where you would expect it to see in our fellow primates. And then, way out in the ethology boondocks, unless you like happen not to be obsessed with primates, you see there's all sorts of species of birds. Corvids is the classification. Corvids, like crows and ravens, quote the raven, things where they are crazy smart, and there's all sorts of reasons why they evolved brains that put all other bird brains to shame, all of that. And corvids could do theory of mind, things of that sort. Okay, more stuff that came out of the world of cognitive ethology, understanding intentionality. So you have a chimp and gets to watch a human coming in with like a plate of kibble to give the chimp or whatever, and one of two things happen. The human trips intentionally and drops the food. Second scenario, the human comes in and dumps it on the floor. Ooh, intentionality. If the chimp is at a less sophisticated cognitive stage, all it will say is, damn, I'm not getting food in either of these circumstances. But chimps understand this one was intentional, tripping was an accident, and they are more affiliative with the person afterward who dropped it by accident. They're more aggressive to the one who seemingly did it on purpose. So they can tell the difference between intent and accidental behavior on the part of another individual. More examples of this. Something remarkable that has been shown with, of all unlikely things, rats. You give rats like three stimuli sort of to go up and sniff and look at, and one of them is the same as the other, and there's one exception. And the rat has to learn that if it like pushes its nose against the exception, it gets a reward. And then you go through all the different combinations, permutations, whatever. This time the target thing is on the right, on the left. And rats learn to do this. They learn to always pick out the one that is different from these other two. And each time it's these same three stimuli. And now you let the rat come in and it's completely new stimuli, new little objects with once again, two of them are the same. And one is an exception. And the rat can rapidly acquire, this is the one you go up and investigate. It not only understands, ooh, no matter what they throw at me, go for B, it understands, go for the one that is different. A level of sophistication nobody thought was ever possible. Bees, bees' flexibility in their cognition back to Carl von Frisch and going around and rotating beehives and showing that bee dancing gives information as to direction, distance, intensity of the food source, how great it is, all of that, except bees think in addition. And this was a really clever study done by this guy, Jones Gould, at Princeton some years ago. Here's what you do: you take a bee, and presumably you convince it to just calmly sit down, and you go into a rowboat with the bee and you row out to the middle of this lake, and you give the bee some amazing piece of food. You give it access to something fantastic, some nectar or honey, or I guess the bees make the honey, some nectar. I don't know. It gives some wonderful food. And the bee flies back to the hive to tell everybody about it. And what is the bee communicating? Okay, go fly out to the middle of that lake. And all the other bees say, this is totally screwed. You don't find food in the middle of lakes. What is with this guy? This guy is making a mistake here, and they don't pay attention to him. Bees are capable of, in effect, saying, that's not a normal location for food, showing the behavioral flexibility to allow themselves to say, no, 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 we're not going to pay attention to this guy, just the same way that vervet monkeys won't pay attention to kids giving alarm calls, because kids, what do they know? They're like totally confused about this stuff. In this case, what's up with this bee? Who knows, but I'm sure not going to go flying along with everybody else in the hive to go out to the middle of a lake where there couldn't possibly be food. Flexible cognition. Then what you begin to see is evidence for numerosity, other species understanding numbers, and where you could begin to see, okay, here this pigeon has to peck at the collection of whatever's the one that has a larger number. Obviously they could tell the difference between 1 0 and 2 and 1, and you can show that pigeons could get up to distinguishing between five of an object and four of them, I think 6 and 5. Big surprise, primates can do that as well. So this is one of those playback experiments with a group of chimps, and in the middle you put the loudspeaker there and you play the sound of threatening vocalization by a strange male. Whoa, everybody freaks out, stops what they're doing, and like three of the male chimps come up to the bush to investigate. Who is this guy? Okay, so that's their behavioral response. Now you do the experiment where you play two voices of menacing stranger male chimps, and our three guys go up and investigate it. Now you do the voice of three different menacing stranger males, and our chimps sort of like pause and stop and go towards it and they go back. Play four of them and they go in the other direction. They know they are outnumbered. They know when it's 3 on 3 and they get a little hesitant about their like cockiness, and they know when they're outnumbered, and they know when they outnumber the two chimps or the single chimp coming out of there, and they know they are numbered. There are numbers, numerosity of that sort. So totally elegant study showing that. Transitivity, all of us learning the logic of that. If A fits into B, and if A fits into B and B fits into C, you know already that A is going to fit into C. You could do transitivity with it. And what is seen is all sorts of primate species have a lot of trouble doing transitivity for inanimate things, for objects, for you put this into this, and you're showing the chimp this whole different things being put inside other things, and they're not great at learning at demonstrating transitivity in cases like that, but they're amazing at displaying social transitivity. You are number 3 in the hierarchy, and you observe number 1 dominates 2, and number 2 dominates 3. And as a result, you go and you grovel and subordinate yourself to number 1. You know, if the one who's dominant to me is subordinate to them, watch out that they do social transitivity more readily than physical transitivity, prepared learning for something like that. And that's been seen now in all sorts of other species, including fish. Russell Fernald, who used to be a professor in the department, is now emeritus. Did all sorts of cool stuff with cichlid fish and like ethologist. He actually trained under Conrad Lorenz back when. And among other things, he showed that fish can do social transitivity in terms of if that one scares that one and this one scares me, I'm going to act scared around that one. So that's possible. Planning for the future. Back to those corvids, those super smart birds, and what was shown in this one study, and Nikki Clayton at Oxford University does this work showing that, okay, here's a pair bonded pair of these birds, and there's two things they like to eat. And what you see is given a whole opportunity to eat both. So both of them will eat some for a while, some for the other, and eventually get full of this one and eat more of that one and that sort of thing. So in this study, what the male of the pair saw was a human come in and feed the female a whole bunch of number one type of food. Of the two types that they eat a whole lot of number one type of food. And eventually the female stops. She is satiated, and the bird is allowed to then, the male is allowed to fly over to another trough with food in it, type 1 and type 2. And what does he bring back to her? Type 2. He is going to know that she is satiated. She's not going to want any more of type 1. She is going to, in the future, want type 2. Incredible cognition with that. Okay, more examples of cognitive ethology. In some ways, I think the most interesting one out there, and we are going to come back to this one in great detail when we get to the aggression lectures. So probably most everyone has heard of this whole world of implicit biases, where we have certain biases against certain outgroup members that are so in there that we are not even aware of them and they happen automatically. And that's a basis of all sorts of misery in the world and implicit biases. And there's this beautiful test, implicit association test, an IAT, that was developed at Harvard, where this shows you if you have an implicit bias. Here's how it works. You look at a series of pictures of faces of us's or thems. And you're like given the instruction this time, press the button of anyone who is an us, and you do it as fast as possible. Then, okay, now for what we're to do with the other one, you get that task under control. Now you do another version of the task. You are flashed up a word that is either very positive, wonderful, generous, heroic, or very negative, backstabbing, skeevy, larcenous. And so, okay, so now as quickly as possible, press the button for the positive term. Okay, you're good at that. Let's do it the other way. Then they are combined. You were flashed up a picture of a person with a picture of the word and a picture of another person, a picture of the other word, and one of them is an us, one is a them, and one is a positive term, and one is a negative one, and you're given instruction, quick, hit the button of the them outgroup member, quick, hit the button with the negative term, with the positive term, all, and what you see is implicit biases come in. If you were asked to do something, if press the button for an us or one of the positive terms, and they are right next to each other, you look at it and you're scanning both and you answer very quickly. If instead the positive attribute is linked to a face of them, and you're told to pull one, you glance at it and you pause for a second. You pause for a couple milliseconds because you were gummed up by the cognitive dissonance. Hey, they're not the ones who are trustworthy. We're the ones are. Weird. Okay, so which one I'm supposed to press that one now? If there's dissonance, people get ever so slightly slower in their response time. If there's dissonance, because you have an implicit association of thems with bad things and us's with good things and things. So totally fascinating. It turns out you can show the exact same thing in non-human primates. This was work done by Laura Santos at Yale. And you take some rhesus monkeys and they're in a group, and no surprise, rhesus monkeys know what everybody else looks like in their group. So you're either flashing up pictures of an us, a member of your group, or a picture of a strange rhesus monkey they've never seen before, an us or them, and they learn how to do that task. We have a button indicating which one they're supposed to press, and they learn how to do that. And then you give them not words with positive or negative connotations, you show them pictures of things with positive or negative connotations. Fruit, wonderful citrus fruit, which every rhesus monkey loves, or something aversive, like a picture of a spider. And now you couple the picture of the monkey, one of us, or stranger, them, with one of the pictures of a positive or a negative, and they're having to do the same exact task. And what you see is when it's a discordant pairing, they're slightly delayed in giving an answer because for a second they stop and say, wait a second, we're the ones who are associated with luscious fruit. They're the ones who are like spiders, not the other way around. They're even having us them groupings on an implicit level. We will be coming back to that plenty. Okay, so ethology spanning from you go out and you just objectively look at behaviors and you glory in the variability of it, to dissecting the different subrealms of behaviors, fixed action patterns, etc., and then getting into this world of neuroethology, learning in an ethological context, cognitive ethology. Totally cool way of looking at behavior. And it's one that we will come back to over and over again in the second half of the course when we look at here, we're going to study language use, we're going to study sexual behavior, whatever. What does the behavior look like? And what we're going to have as our principle over and over is let's look at it like an ethologist, someone who is objectively observing naturalistic behavior of us humans and trying to understand things that are in a different language from us. Okay, so that finishes our bucket for ethology.